I felt the wrongness before I even understood it. A faint tightening in my gut as the salt-heavy breeze from the harbor clung to my coat, and I pushed open the door to my study, my fingers reaching for the light switch out of habit, halting halfway through the motion as if some unseen hand had frozen them in midair, because something subtle but unmistakably out of place, was humming beneath the surface of the room. I thought I knew better than my own reflection. There was nothing dramatic at first glance, no overturned chairs, no shattered glass, no sign of a break-in. And yet after nearly 40 years living in this old townhouse in Grey Harbor, and more than 3 decades serving as a magistrate for the Crown Court of Arvindale, I knew the angles of this space like the rhythm of my own breath. Every shelf, every shadow, every inch of the floorboards that creaked only under specific steps. And the moment I saw the stack of legal folios on my desk shifted ever so slightly to the left, no more than an inch, but wrong, I felt the cold bloom behind my ribs. My private filing cabinet, the heavy iron one with a lock I trusted more than most people, showed new scratches around the keyhole, thin and hesitant marks that told a story only someone with my training would notice. I set my water bottle on the desk with exaggerated care, suppressing the instinct to tear open every drawer, and instead let my eyes catalogue the room with the same methodical calm that had guided me through trials where a single detail meant the difference between truth and deception. The property deed folder I always left facing outward now sat at a slight diagonal. Tax ledgers usually ordered chronologically had been disturbed, put back almost in place, but not perfectly. And that almost was what struck me hardest, because whoever had done this was trying to mimic my meticulous habits, and mimicry always reveals intention. I crouched before the cabinet, my knees complaining the way they do now that I'm 68, and studied the lock. Tiny scratches, a clumsy attempt with a letter opener or kitchen knife. The drawer opened smoothly. Nothing missing but something rearranged. My will was now buried beneath insurance papers instead of resting above them. Financial statements bore smudged thumbprints that weren't mine. For a fleeting second, I wondered if I had done this myself, moved things absent-mindedly. But even as the thought formed, I dismissed it. 3 decades on the bench had taught me to trust evidence more than comforting explanations. My memory may be aging, but it is not dissolving. Not yet. Standing there in the quiet of my study, a stranger's fingerprints on my documents, something cold and deliberate slotted into place behind my sternum. This wasn't panic. It was recognition. The same instinct that had helped me spot perjured testimony, forged signatures, rehearsed declarations. Someone had been in this room, someone who knew where to look. The question wasn't what they wanted. It was who they were. The answer revealed itself at dinner without a single word spoken. I sat at the head of the table as always. To my right, my son Adrian, and across from him his wife Selene. The roasted lamb was overcooked. Selene never quite mastered the recipes my late wife used to make, but I cut it with steady precision, listening as they exchanged trivial remarks about their day. Then Adrian cleared his throat and asked, too casually, "Dad, have you updated your will recently? Just want to make sure everything is organized properly." My fork stopped midair, then lowered to the plate with controlled grace. The metallic click against porcelain rang louder than it should have. I studied my son, not looked at him, but studied him, the way I once examined defendants trying to appear sincere. His gaze flicked to Celine, then back to me too quickly for innocence. "Why do you ask?" I said. "Just precaution, you know. At your age." At your age. I let the words hang. A faint flush rose from his collar. Selene leaned forward with warmth shaped carefully, strategically. "We only want what's best for you, Orion," she said, my name clipped neatly between her teeth. Having everything documented protects everyone, avoids confusion later. I sipped water, not for thirst, but for time. Her hand tightened around her fork, tendons like taut wires. Confusion about what exactly? I asked. She blinked, recovered quickly. Just legal things. Adrian worries about you living alone in such a big house. Oh, yes. Not a question. I resumed eating, allowing silence to wrap around them. After dinner, they sat together on the living room couch, heads touching, voices low, silhouettes reflected in the window behind the television, where they assumed I wasn't watching. Selene touched Adrian's arm, a gesture that might have been comfort or strategy. He nodded, looked my way, then quickly looked away. They believed I saw nothing. They had no idea I was already assembling a case. That night I lay awake staring at the slow rotation of the ceiling fan, unable to sleep, the weight of realization settling hard. My son, the boy I had raised, paid through law school, celebrated at his wedding, now sat in my home plotting to have me declared mentally unfit so he could seize control of everything I owned. The house was worth nearly £1,000,000 on the Grey Harbor market. My life insurance policy another $500,000. Retirement accounts, investments, a small vineyard estate in the hills of Winterloch, gifted by my father. Plenty of motivation for someone impatient. Before dawn, I was already moving through the house like a ghost. The morning mail sat where Adrian had presumably dropped it the day before. 3 envelopes bore signs of tampering, sloppily reopened and resealed. 2 letters from the Treasury Office, ones I'd been expecting, were missing entirely. I opened the postal tracking app. Both letters showed as delivered 3 days earlier. My hands trembled only long enough to take photographs. After that, I switched into the calm that had carried me through countless trials. Back in my study, I stared at the violated cabinet, let anger wash through me once, and then locked it away. 30 years of watching people lie had taught me everyone has a tell. Adrian's was always in the eyes. He couldn't hold my gaze for more than 3 seconds the night before. Motive, money, opportunity. He lived under my roof. The method was not yet clear, but intentions were. They believed I was a tired old man who wouldn't notice his life being stolen piece by piece. I lowered myself into the chair and whispered into the silence. They think I'm just an old man. I let the words settle, sharpening into resolve. They're going to learn what 30 years in court really taught me. The plan formed with frightening clarity. Not revenge, not yet. First, information. And for information, I needed invisibility. They had to believe they'd won, that I was out of the way. They wanted me gone. Very well. I would disappear, but on my terms. I pulled out a notebook, made lists, supplies, vantage points, people who owed me favors. The machinery of counterattack clicked into motion, precise as the judgments I used to draft. By sunrise, shadows stretching long on the floorboards, I knew exactly what to do. They had opened a door expecting a vulnerable old man behind it. They would find something else entirely, a magistrate unbound by courtroom rules. For the next 2 days, I acted my role flawlessly, the absent-minded retiree making travel preparations. And then, over breakfast, I set the trap. Buttering my toast slowly, I said, "I've been thinking about that trip to the northern wilds we talked about. I'm going. 2 weeks. Starting today." Adrian's fork clattered. "Today?" "I'm retired," I shrugged. "No time like the present." I added softly, "Your mother always wanted to see those mountains." True sentiment, strategically placed. Their exchanged glances told me everything. Celine leaned in with well-practiced warmth. "That's wonderful, Orion. You deserve a break. Don't worry about anything here. Don't worry about anything here. The words floated like confession. I nodded as if comforted, watched her fingers tap the table with barely contained impatience, watched Adrian struggle to sound concerned about me driving long distances at my age. His relief when I dismissed the concern was painful to witness. My own son relieved that I wouldn't make stealing easier for him by staying. I spent the morning crafting the perfect illusion, maps sprawled on the table, hiking boots, camera gear, every detail believable, hidden among the tourist items, my field binoculars, an old investigator's notebook, a compact digital recorder, the tools of a man preparing not for leisure but surveillance. By afternoon, the desert heat hit 40 degrees as I loaded the car. Adrian helped, muscles taut with guilt and anticipation, and when he hugged me goodbye, his body was stiff as rope. "Take care of everything while I'm gone," I said quietly. "We will, Dad," he murmured. Selene kissed me on the cheek, perfume far more expensive than anything her current finances should allow, bought on credit for a future she thought was guaranteed. I climbed into the car, watched them wave. The moment they assumed I couldn't see them anymore, their expressions shifted, celebration bursting through the mask. I drove away, but not north. 20 kilometers east stood the Desert Crest Motel, the kind that accepted cash and asked no questions. I checked in under a false name. One, belonging to a deceased former client whose details I still remembered. The room was exactly what I expected. Thin carpet, rattling air conditioner, bolt-secured television. I sat on the bed and waited for nightfall. Ate a sandwich, drank water, tried to sleep. Failed. My mind was already inside my house, picturing them moving through it. At 9:30 p.m., I drove back through side streets only long-time locals knew. Parked 3 blocks away beneath an old cedar tree. The vacant house across from mine, unsold for months, held a realtor's lockbox I'd memorized the code for, 5821. The click sounded loud in the solitude. The house smelled of dust and waiting. I found the front bedroom with perfect line of sight to my windows, set up a folding chair, and raised my binoculars. And there they were. Adrian pacing the living room, Selene on the sofa, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing sharply as though managing a covert operation. A strange calm washed over me. Not fear, not panic clarity, the same cold alignment of instinct I felt during complex fraud trials when all the pieces finally slid into place. 30 years of watching criminals from the bench, and now I was watching my own family from a darkened room across the street. I settled in for a long night, and here, sitting in that dusty shell of a house, I caught myself thinking, absurdly, that if anyone else were hearing this right now, they'd lean forward, waiting for the turn, and maybe even consider subscribing to hear what happened next, because stories like this, they tighten around you slowly, like closing jaws. 3 days passed this way. Coffee cups stacked, fast food wrappers in a bag, my spine aching from the folding chair, my eyes raw from staring through glass, but my mind sharper than ever. And yet the heart of their plan remained out of reach, until footsteps sounded on the porch of the empty house. My hand flew to my phone, excuses already forming. But when the door opened, I froze. There stood an elderly woman, small, calm, impossibly composed, my neighbor of nearly 40 years, Mrs. Ilara Wynne. She stepped inside, closed the door gently, and said, "I've been watching them too, Orion." For a long moment, I simply stared at her, my breath trapped somewhere between disbelief and dread, because Mrs. Ilara Wynne, quiet, soft-spoken, cardigan-wearing Ilara who watered her roses at dawn and baked bread on Sundays, stood inside the abandoned house as if she had every right to be there, her expression neither confused nor apologetic, but steady in a way that sent a ripple down my spine. "Elara," I managed, my voice tight. "What are you doing here?" She walked toward the front window, the one I had been using as my vantage point, and her movements had the measured certainty of someone who had rehearsed them long before tonight. "The same as you," she said, her tone free of accusation or surprise. "Looking for the truth." I swallowed the instinct to deny everything. Old courtroom habits die hard. But she gestured toward the binoculars, the open notebook, the cold coffee cup, and raised a silver eyebrow. "Don't pretend you're doing anything else," she said gently. "You've been sitting here night after night. You think I wouldn't notice?" She tapped the edge of her temple. 40 years living across from you. You think I wouldn't recognize when something's wrong?" I felt the tension in my shoulders ease only because the alternative was panic. "You've been watching my house," I said slowly. "Of course," she replied, as though discussing the weather. "I've been watching your house for years. You're not the only one who sees patterns, Orion. And lately the patterns have changed." I opened my mouth, closed it, tried again. "What patterns?" She pulled a small notebook from her cardigan pocket, a modest, worn little thing with bent corners, and flipped it open. The pages were lined with neat handwriting, each entry dated. "Tuesday, 1:30 in the afternoon," she said. "A man in a gray suit entered your home with a leather briefcase, stayed 40 minutes, came back Thursday morning. Both times your son let him in." She turned another page, eyes scanning. "Wednesday night, Celine photographed every room on the first floor, including the study. Thursday evening, Adrian moved several boxes into the garage. Friday, Celine burned papers in the backyard fire pit." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You're sure?" I asked. She shot me a look sharp enough to cut glass. "I may be old, Orion, but I'm not blind." For the first time since all of this had begun, I felt something close to camaraderie instead of isolation. But when I asked softly, "Why are you helping me?" her expression shifted, and a flicker of pain crossed her features. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight I had never heard from her. "Because my own daughter stole from me before she died," she said simply. "I did nothing then. I will not do nothing now. Not when I see the same shadow falling over someone else." The silence that followed was heavy, shared, understood. She reached into a canvas tote I hadn't noticed and pulled out a thermos, 2 cups, and sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. "You'll need your strength," she said matter-of-factly. "Midnight is close." Midnight. The word hit me like a recalled prophecy. Earlier that afternoon, when she'd caught my wrist outside my home and whispered, "You'll see everything at midnight," I'd thought perhaps fear had made me imagine the gravity in her voice. Now I understood she had meant every syllable. We sat side by side at the window as dusk sank into full night, watching my house glow brighter than the rest of the street, a beacon of treachery masquerading as a home. Lights in every room, movement behind the curtains, shadowy silhouettes pacing, speaking, preparing. I sipped the bitter coffee she poured, barely tasting it, my eyes fixed on the house I had once filled with birthdays and laughter and warmth. At 11:40, she laid a hand lightly on my arm. "It's time." My heartbeat thudded like a gavel inside my chest. I raised the binoculars just as headlights crept down the street. Slow, deliberate, predatory. A black sedan glided to a stop in my driveway. The engine shut off. A man stepped out, tall, well-dressed, carrying a leather briefcase identical to the one Elara had noted. He checked his watch, scanned the street with professional caution, then headed for the porch. "That's him," Ilara whispered. "The one with the briefcase." I lowered the binoculars just long enough to look at her. "You're certain?" She nodded. I searched his name after the second visit. Luis Charter, property consultant, suspiciously flexible hours. The name clicked into place like the corner of a puzzle that had been waiting for confirmation. A facilitator, a broker for dirty business, a midnight deal maker. He reached my front door, and before he could knock, it opened. Adrian stood inside, silhouette framed in the doorway. They exchanged quick, clipped words. No handshake, no pretense. Strictly business. Charter entered. The door shut behind them. Through the window, I watched the three figures move into my dining room. Charter placed his briefcase on my table, and opened it. Adrian brought chairs. Selene emerged from the hallway carrying a familiar red folder. My stomach clenched so hard I tasted iron. That folder had been stored in my locked cabinet. "What's inside?" Ilara whispered. My voice sounded like gravel. "The deed, the original will, financial records. Everything they need to take what's yours," she murmured. I took photos of everything I could capture, blurred edges, reflections on glass, but proof nonetheless. Charter held the documents up to the light, checking for watermarks, seals, signatures. Selene sat unnervingly composed, watching Charter with the cold confidence of someone who thought herself untouchable. Adrian, in contrast, looked like he was unraveling at the seams. Twitchy hands, restless movements, eyes darting anywhere but at the truth. 30 minutes passed, then 40. Then Charter slid papers across the table. Adrian signed. Selene signed, pen scraping treason across my documents. Charter accepted the pages, returned them to his briefcase, and the three of them rose from the table. Selene vanished briefly and returned with a bottle of champagne, my champagne, and poured 3 glasses. They toasted. They smiled. They celebrated the theft of my life as casually as one celebrates a promotion or a birthday. Fire roared in my veins. Every instinct screamed to storm across the street, rip open the door, confront them with the truth. But justice, not fury, had guided me for 3 decades. Evidence condemns. Anger ruins cases. "Keep recording," Ilara whispered. "Let them tie their own noose." I lifted my phone again, documenting their toast, their smiles, their comfortable belief that no one in the world could see their midnight crime. At 12:45, Charter prepared to leave. Ilara slipped to the window and opened it just enough to catch sound. Warm desert air rushed in, carrying faint voices. "If the notary verifies it's legitimate, we close on the 15th, Charter said. "Buyers are offering 650,000 in cash." The number struck me like a hammer. Adrian's voice wavered. "It's legitimate. My father signed months ago." A lie delivered with shaky conviction. Selene added smoothly, "We've been planning this for months." Months. Charter departed. The car pulled away. Adrian and Selene lingered on the porch, exchanging low voices I couldn't quite catch, until Selene laughed, bright and triumphant. The door closed behind them. My house fell quiet. Silence wrapped itself around the neighborhood like a shroud. I sank back in the folding chair, drained but electrified, because we had seen everything, captured everything. "They said you signed," Ilara murmured. "You never signed anything." "They forged it," I said. "They're counting on me being too old, too confused to remember what I supposedly agreed to." She tapped her notebook. "You're not confused, and now the pattern is complete." "What I need now," I said slowly, "is proof of the forgery itself. The document." "Then you'll have to go inside," she replied without hesitation, "before they destroy anything." The next 3 days unfolded in a tense, methodical rhythm. I watched their routines through binoculars. Adrian left for work at 8:30 every morning. Celine ran errands on Tuesdays and Thursdays, predictable and unhurried. Thursday would be my window. That morning, dressed in a plain shirt, baseball cap, and sunglasses, I parked my car 2 blocks away and approached my home with the confidence of a man who belonged there. Because I did. I used my own key. The lock turned with familiar ease, but something inside me twisted as I stepped over the threshold. How strange to feel like an intruder in your own home. The living room hummed with the television left on to simulate presence. The air smelled faintly of cleaning products, Celine's attempt at erasing any trace of wrongdoing. I moved quietly through the hallways, each step a battle between fury and focus. The guest room, Adrian's makeshift office, held papers strewn across a desk. And in the bottom drawer, buried under envelopes, I found the red folder. Not even locked away. Overconfidence is a thief's greatest flaw. I spread the contents across the desk. The power of attorney, dated May 20th. And at the bottom, a signature purporting to be mine. It was close, close enough to fool a casual eye, but the pressure points were wrong. The loop in the O of Orion slightly off. The ink newer than the paper. Amateur forgery. I photographed everything, every page, every detail, and then, as I prepared to, reassemble it all, thin sheets slipped from between 2 folders. Printed emails. The first line hit me like a blow. Marco, once the sale is done, my half, 25,000, will be more than enough to start over. A message from Cellini to someone in Los Angeles. The next email, Adrian thinks the house is for us. He doesn't know I'm leaving. Betrayal layered on betrayal. But I did not feel triumph, only a growing hollowness. My son was being used, but he had chosen to betray me first. I photographed the emails, put everything back exactly as I found it, then moved through the house, my house, seeing ghosts of memories in every corner. My late wife's smile on the framed photos, Adrian's childhood drawings, the worn leather couch where we once watched football matches, all poisoned now by the knowledge of what they'd plotted within these same walls. I slipped out the back door, crossed into the neighbor's yard, and returned to the motel. There I spread the evidence across the bed. Photos, emails, notes, the beginnings of a legal arsenal. I called Elara. I have everything, I said. The forged documents, the emails, the timestamps. She exhaled. Then you know what comes next. Yes, I said. Now I stop playing defense. That night I slept little. I reviewed every image, building mental exhibits the way I had in court for decades. By dawn, I had transformed from father to plaintiff. By noon, I was wearing my old magistrate's suit, polished shoes, and a steel blue tie. The man in the mirror was not a victim. He was preparing for trial. My first stop was the notary office of an old colleague, Madame Leora Chen. Together, we drafted a sworn affidavit declaring I had never granted power of attorney to anyone for any purpose. The stamp of her seal echoed like a gavel. Next, I went to the banking director I trusted, Mr. Darian Holt, who froze all property-related actions unless I appeared in person. Then came the estate law specialist I had researched in advance, attorney Cassandra Morell. Her office smelled of cedar and expensive ink. She listened as I explained a family precaution situation, a partial truth, then set to work, drafting an irrevocable trust, securing the house under my sole control, effective retroactively to mid-May, before the alleged power of attorney was signed. By late afternoon, my home legally belonged to a trust Adrian could not touch. Even if the forged documents convinced someone temporarily, they held no power over assets no longer in my name. 5 folders, 5 colors, 5 airtight categories of evidence, digital backups, physical backups, a set stored in a bank vault, another with Elara. Nothing left to chance. "When will you confront them?" Elara asked that evening over the phone. "At the closing," I said. "In 2 weeks, publicly, legally, irrefutably." "That's cold," she murmured. "Not cold," I replied. "Correct." 12 days passed. I returned home, feigning exhaustion, feigning confusion, feigning fragility. Adrian and Selene greeted me with overly bright smiles. I pretended not to see the tension behind them. At dinner, they probed gently, testing my memory, planting seeds. "Dad, you've been forgetful lately. Are you sure you remember everything you signed last month?" Their voices were honeyed poison. I recorded every word. Late that night, as I walked past their bedroom, I heard Adrian murmur, "He doesn't remember anything." Selene's reply, "Perfect. If he protests, we claim cognitive decline. In 3 days, we're free." I recorded that too. And when I sent the audio to Cassandra, her response was instantaneous. "This seals the case." The morning of the closing arrived wrapped in a strange electric stillness, as if the world were holding its breath for the verdict none of them saw coming, and I dressed with the calm precision of a man preparing not for confrontation, but for a final ruling, straightening my Navy magistrate's suit, tightening the knot of my tie, and placing the 5 colored folders into my leather briefcase, the weight of them grounding me like the familiar feel of a gavel in hand. Adrian and Selene thought I had gone out to run errands. They barely looked up when I said I'd be back later, and I walked to my car with the controlled cadence of someone carrying an entire reckoning beneath his ribs. The fiduciary office occupied the upper floor of a modern glass building in northern Gray Harbor, its long corridor lined with soft lights that reflected off polished floors like faint ghosts. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I saw them already seated. Louis Charter at the head of the table, arranging documents with mechanical confidence. Adrian and Selene to his left, dressed too neatly, too excited, their anticipation almost vibrating in the air, and across from them the buyer, Ricardo Torres, a well-dressed investor from the coastal province of Westbourne, checking his watch with mild impatience. The fiduciary officer, Serena Miles, was setting out the closing paperwork, unaware of the storm about to break. Cassandra Morel stood at my side in a sharp charcoal suit, holding her own binder of supporting documents. "Ready," she whispered. "I've been ready for 12 days," I murmured, and together we pushed open the door. Silence detonated in the room. They all turned. Adrian's face drained of color so quickly it was as if someone had pulled the life out of him. Selene half rose from her chair, gripping the table. Charter frowned, confused but alert. Torres looked irritated at the interruption. Serena straightened instinctively, sensing procedural disruption. I walked to the empty seat at the opposite end of the table, laid my briefcase down, and spoke in the same voice I had once used to open court. "Good afternoon. My name is Orion Hale. I am the rightful owner of the property you are attempting to sell." Celine's voice broke into the stillness. "Orion, what are you—" But I didn't look at her. I addressed Serena directly. "This transaction cannot proceed. The power of attorney authorizing it is fraudulent." Adrian began to stammer some prepared lie, but I lifted a hand, palm outward, the same gesture that once commanded silence from entire courtrooms. "Sit down, Adrian." He froze. Slowly he sank back into his chair. I opened my briefcase and withdrew the first folder, a red one. containing my sworn affidavit. I placed it in front of Serena. Here is my notarized declaration, executed under oath, affirming that I never granted any authority to anyone to manage or sell my property. Cassandra stepped forward, opening the blue folder and handing its contents to Serena as well. Attached is an officially registered irrevocable trust, she said evenly, placing full ownership of the property solely in Mr. Hale's control as of May 15th, prior to the date of the alleged power of attorney. Therefore, even if such a document were genuine, which it is not, it would hold no legal effect. Serena's eyes widened as she flipped through the pages, scanning registration stamps, dates, signatures, seals. She raised her gaze to Charter. "Did you verify the trust before preparing this closing?" He looked suddenly green. "The power seemed legitimate," he muttered. "I proceeded based on the documents provided." Torres, sensing his investment collapsing, leaned forward, voice sharp. "You assured me the title was clear. You assured me everything was above board." Celine jumped in, desperation dripping through her attempted poise. "This is a misunderstanding. Orion signed. He just doesn't remember. He's been confused lately, forgetful." I pulled out my phone. "Let's refresh everyone's memory," I said, and pressed play. Celine's voice filled the room. "If he protests, we claim cognitive decline." Adrian's voice followed immediately. "He won't know anything until it's over. 3 days and we're free." And then Selene again, cold and certain. "Free at last." I paused the audio. Silence heavy as stone. I did not need to look at them to know their faces had collapsed into horror. Instead, I removed the black folder from my case, spread photographs across the table. The midnight meeting in my dining room, the forged documents illuminated under the chandelier, signatures affixed, champagne glasses raised in toast. Then I opened my laptop, tilting it so the enlarged images projected clearly. Charter reviewing stolen documents, Adrian's trembling hand. Signing the false forms, Celine handing over my red folder with clinical efficiency. Torres inhaled sharply. "This is fraud," he said, his voice cold as steel. "Gross, intentional fraud." Charter sputtered. I was told these documents were obtained legitimately." "And you didn't verify," Serena said sharply. "This is a serious breach. This operation is halted effective immediately. And by regulation, I am obligated to notify the authorities of possible document forgery." Panic rippled through the room. Celine shot to her feet. "Orion, please, you can't do this. We're family." I looked at her with the same serene finality with which I had pronounced sentences. "For 30 years I upheld the law without fear or favor. That does not change because you married my son." Adrian's voice cracked. "Dad, please, please, we can fix this. I made a mistake." "You made many," I said quietly. "You broke into my study. You tampered with my mail. You tried to sell my home behind my back. You forged my signature. You conspired with your wife to declare me incompetent. And you celebrated it." His face crumpled as if struck, but I felt no satisfaction, only inevitability. "You stopped being my son," I said, "the moment you decided to make me your victim." I closed my briefcase as Serena gathered the evidence, preparing her formal report. Cassandra touched my arm lightly. "It's done," she said. But it wasn't. Not yet. As I walked out of the building, sunlight pouring down the steps like molten truth, Cassandra asked softly, "Where to now?" And I answered without hesitation, "The police station." Inside the municipal precinct, Officer Mireya Rowan reviewed every piece of evidence: the forged documents, the emails, the audio recordings, the photographs. She looked up only once to ask, "You understand you are accusing your own family?" "I am reporting a crime," I said. "Their actions define the relationship, not my report." She nodded and began drafting the criminal complaint. Within days, summonses were issued. Adrian confessed first. He admitted he knew the document was forged. Celine denied everything until confronted with her emails to Marco in Los Angeles, after which she turned on Adrian, blaming him for all of it. Their alliance collapsed like wet paper. Cassandra simultaneously filed a civil suit for damages, 100,000 crowns. "You likely won't see that money," she told me, "but the judgment will follow them for years." "Good," I said. "Paper trails matter." A judge granted my petition for eviction as well. A week later, from my study window, I watched movers load their belongings into a truck. When Adrian approached my door one last time, his eyes red, his voice trembling. "Dad, please, give me another chance." I stepped into the doorway but did not move aside. "You chose this path," I said. "I did not push you onto it. I warned you with every example I ever lived. Integrity is not inherited. It is chosen." "I'm your son," he whispered. "You were," I replied, and closed the door. The criminal sentencing came in late August. After 30 years entering the courthouse as a magistrate, I walked in that day as a victim and a citizen. Adrian received 18 months of supervised release, community service, fines, and restitution. Celine received harsher terms for her central role: 2 years of supervised release, heavy fines, restitution, and a 5-year ban from employment in real estate. When the gavel fell, I felt neither triumph nor relief, only completion. On the courthouse steps, Ilara stood waiting for me, sunlight catching the silver in her hair. "Justice won," she said softly. "Justice required a little push," I replied. She smiled. "So, what now?" "Now," I said, "I use what I know to help others. No one in our neighborhood should fall prey to schemes like this again." As I drove home through the familiar streets, past the bank, the notary office, the fiduciary firm, the police station, it struck me how each place had become part of this strange, painful odyssey. I parked in my driveway, sat for a moment with my hands on the steering wheel, and let the quiet settle inside me. 30 years on the bench, and never had I imagined my own son standing where defendants once stood. He had been given every advantage, every support, every example of honesty. But greed had been louder, and I would not let greed devour me. I stepped inside. The new locks clicked with satisfying finality. My home was quiet, secure, mine again. Grief lingered in the corners. It would for a long time, but it did not consume me, because I had kept the one thing no thief could take: my dignity. I brewed coffee, opened my laptop, and began searching for senior legal aid programs where I could volunteer. Turn pain into purpose. Turn betrayal into protection. They had tried to make me a victim. I refused. That refusal, not the legal strategy, not the courtroom victory, was the true triumph. Some bonds are sacred. Some betrayals cannot be forgiven. And that, too, is all right. My house, my life, stood intact once more. And if you're listening to this, if you've stayed with me through every turn of this long descent and rise back to truth, then you understand why some stories must be told. And maybe that's reason enough to follow this channel, to stay close, to keep listening. Because the world is full of quiet battles, and sometimes the smallest stories are the ones that show us how to survive the deepest cuts. If this one reached you, then stay. There are more to come.